You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Welcome to Volatility Views, the premier program for volatility traders. Each week, we'll take a deep dive into the world of volatility with in-depth analysis, trading activity reviews, strategy breakdowns, cutting-edge education, and much more. We'll also bring you exclusive conversations with the traders, researchers, and asset managers who are reshaping the volatility landscape. If it involves volatility, then you'll find it on Volatility Views. Volatility Views is brought to you by MIAX, one of the fastest, most efficient trading platforms in the world. MIAX is proud to bring you SPIX volatility products. SPIX options and futures are traded on the SPIX Volatility Index, SPIK, offering pinpoint accuracy, radically faster dissemination, and a highly transparent settlement auction, all for ultra-low exchange fees. It's volatility reimagined. Learn more about SPIX at miaxoptions.com/spikes. Options and futures involve risk and are not suitable for all investors. The statements made are provided for informational purposes only and should not be relied on for financial or legal advice. And now, it's time to take a deep dive into the world of volatility. It's time for Volatility Views.
All right, everybody. That music means we are back here one final time for our broadcast week. For all of you on-demand folks out there, all you cool kids in the Secret Club, you get an extra show coming at you right after Volatility Views. Of course, where do you go if you want to join all that fun, all the party that's going on with all the extra shows and the giveaways and the Q&As and the other fun stuff? Live access to whatever show tickles your fancy throughout the week. TheOptionsInsider.com/pro is the place to go. Of course, if you're really cool, you can go to /secret club, but we don't talk about that. That's only for a select few out there. And of course, if you're one of our many of on-demand listeners coming off the hottest month in the history of the network, that's an extensive history, 15 plus years. We kind of created this whole options podcast thing way back in the primordial ooze days when you had to have an RSS reader to get it, and there was no iPhone. It was still just a blip in Steve Jobs' eye. So we have quite the history. So when I say it's the busiest month in our network's history, that's a lot. So we appreciate all you folks who've been tuning in, all you on-demand folks as well. Clearly, all your rating and reviewing these days is helping drive new folks. People are concerned. They have questions. I get it. How can you not? Looking at these markets, there is so much vol. Vol is moving all over the place. How can you not have questions about this stuff? So if you like what you hear on the on-demand side, keep rating and reviewing. It really does help all the new folks who need somewhere to turn in these tumultuous markets. It's to help them find us on their platform, wherever they are getting their podcasts of choice. The show is pretty much available everywhere under the sun right now. And of course, keep those questions and comments coming. We do love to hear from all of you folks out there. Let's see who we're hearing from on the show today. First, let's go out to the Southern Volatility Mecca known as Austin, where we are joined once again by the greasiest of meatballs, Mr. Mark Sebastian from OptionPit.com. Mr. Meatball, welcome back to Volatility Views, sir.
Good to be here, Mark. I'm happy to be joining us and, excited to talk markets today and what's happening. It's been an interesting week, to say the least.
A very interesting week. A lot of interesting stuff going on right now. Our chat's all fired up about it. We're also joined in the MIAX hot seat by the one, the only Mr. Brian Overby, the senior options analyst over there at Ally Invest, known around these parts as the options guy, also known as the host of his own show, Options Playbook Radio. Mr. Overby, welcome back to a show that is not your show, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm excited to talk about volatility. The most befuddling thing in the marketplace to me is the way the VIX has been acting overall. So I'd love to have a little chat about it. Get you guys' views on it.
Well, you came to the right show, sir. Let's do it. It is time for the Volatility Review.
It's time to break down the latest developments in the volatility trading world. It's time for the Volatility Review.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Volatility Review, the portion of the show where we do just that. We review the week that was and indeed still is from a vol trading and trending and analysis and unusual activity perspective. And Mr. Meatball, I have to kick things off before we even dive into the ball. Our chat is all a tizzy with the news. I'm sure you've seen that. You missed our Monday episode of the Option Blocks. You didn't get to play our Guess That 80s Wrestler game. But there is a lot of news on that front today. Our chat's all fired up because Vince is out, sir. Have you seen this news? Vince stepping down as CEO of WWE. He has been forced out by this latest wave of scandals. You have not seen this news broke this morning?
No. Wow.
Huge news. I recommend listeners, even if you're not a wrestling fan, if you like to go down a good rabbit hole of controversy and Succession era drama, that HBO show, I guarantee you, just go look for what's trending on Twitter with this stuff right now. It is a Machiavellian Roman-esque series of conspiracies and who's striving to undo who, and this guy behind the scenes, this Nick Khan guy, has been pulling the strings all this time. He's been slowly but surely dismantling the McMahon family. He ousted the son a few months ago, then he ousted the daughter about a month ago, and then the company has been slamming her, saying she was completely incompetent, terrible at her job, and then this someone mysteriously internally leaks these documents that trigger the Wall Street Journal investigation, which now causes Vince to be ousted. Everyone thinks it's this guy behind the scenes pulling all these strings. And then lo and behold, the woman that he ousted, apparently, or people think he ousted, and buried as completely incompetent, now comes back and is the interim CEO. It is epic levels of drama, Mr. Meatball.
That's crazy. Yeah, well, shockingly, Stephanie McMahon is now the CEO. So
shocking.
no big change.
She was just ousted like a month ago, though. She was gone, too. They brought her back for this.
She's back. But, Linda, don't be surprised if Linda takes over. We got Shane. This is some craziness. I am in utter shock. Guess I'm going to have to watch Friday Night SmackDown tonight. And
you know what? All this has been the Vince show forever. The stock's off $1.25 right now. That's all Vince is worth. At $1.25. This stock, weirdly enough, has been one of the best performers of the year. If you wanted a name that is completely immune to the slings and arrows of the rest of the market, it has been WWE. It has rallied pretty much all year while everything else has sold off. So, this thing, it sold off down to 62 today, and then it's bounced off that. So apparently Vince, the guy who created all this, only worth a couple of bucks. Yeah, I had to just touch on that at the top of the show. Brian, feel free to ignore all wrestling drama for the rest of the show, but there's so much going on out there. I guarantee you, listeners, there will be books written about this. It will be fascinating. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes machinations going on in the already machination-filled world of wrestling. All right, let's go on out to the markets. A lot of machinations out there as well. It's another one of those sessions where if you didn't like what the markets were bringing you, just wait 5 minutes. You got a whole new session waiting for you there, because we were looking mixed to mostly red not that long before showtime. And then as we got geared up, got ready for vol views, the market said, wait a minute, it's vol views time. We got to do something. We got to get moving. They started popping. We're seeing the S&P up close to about 0.9%. Dow, the laggard, up about 0.6%. NASDAQ up over 2%. So we got the S&P back up over 3,700 after selling off hard, back below 3,700. Remember, that 3,700 level, kind of a magic level. That's the level a lot of you said in our poll a few weeks ago. If you had to pick a level where you're going to start BTFDing in the S&P, 3,700 was it. So I think that might be our next question of the week next week is, are you buying here? Are you buying back in, or are you adjusting those levels even lower? I must know what you folks are up to out there. But a lot going on. all that's meant a lot of turmoil, a lot of topsy-turviness on the vol screen now that we're rallying. Some of that vol coming in. By the end of the show, I'm sure a lot of these numbers will be a lot lower. When we kicked off the show, Spikes was at a 31.5, up 2.25 from where it was this time last week. VIX cash was at about 31.25. That puts it up about 2.5 points from where it was this time last week. VVIX back up into triple digits land. Will it stay there the whole show? Let's find out. It was at 109.25 when we commenced operations here, up 7 points from where it was this time last week. Speaking of vol, let's go out to the Viking. Man, this thing has done a lot of living over the past week to 10 days, aka V-Spikes, of course. You guys, if you can't find it in your platform of choice, some platforms still don't have it, then just go to Simon's site, t3index.com. It's all there. It's at a 138 coming into showtime, up a whopping 29 points from where it was last. 29 points. It hit its low right before our show last week. It was on the 8th. 105.9. That's the low since the launch of that product. And now it's up to 138. So a lot of living in the vol of spikes out there over this past week. All right, Brian, we set the table. A lot going on. WWE drama fill in the air. Market drama fill in the rest of the air. What has been lighting up your tape and catching your eye in the world of vol these days, sir?
Well, just the fact that it still remains muted in general. I cannot believe since we've had the talks of the recession and all of the steady decline in the market that we have not seen the VIX above 40 at all during this time period. I think that's the thing that is the most interesting to me. And not only have we not seen the VIX make that big spike up, which I'm even actually seeing the normal, not option trading analysts on CNBC kind of begging for the VIX to get to that high so that it might be some sign of capitulation and maybe help you pick the bottom. And I'm putting a lot of maybes in there because you can't put it all just on the VIX index or any of the volatility indexes. And so that is befuddling to me. But then to see a couple of weeks ago, which I even talked about on Options Playbook Radio, the fact that the VVIX came tumbling down to those lowest levels since the pandemic. And we saw the VVIX get all the way down to the 90 level, which I'm sure you guys have talked a little bit about on the show, but I just did not get that. I don't understand. You're seeing some large out of the money put volume on the IWMs, on the SPYs. That was highlighted last week by a few of the analysts, and to see the VIX just hanging around that 30% level. And by the way, the new norm for the VIX is basically 22 was what I would consider low volatility in this stage, and 26, 27 is probably normal. But if you look at the historical volatility recently, you're seeing that the historical vol is higher than the actual implied, and it's been that way for quite some time. So once again, that's probably the most, I don't even know how to say it, that the most interesting storyline compared to obviously a 3/4 point a hike in the interest rates by the Fed and just the volatility of the market in general.
So you mentioned that spike to 40 in VIX, pun intended out there. That was our question of the week a couple of weeks ago. We asked all of our listeners, are they buying into that hypothesis? Do we need a spike in VIX to really signal broad capitulation in the marketplace out there? And a lot of them said yes. They came in and around, I believe that 40 level in VIX was kind of their level too. VIX needs to spike over 40 to really signal that this broad market, the back is broken of the broad market, and now we can kind of dive in with a little bit more safety out there. So, Brian, it sounds like you subscribe to that theory as well. We need to see VIX get a bit higher before you feel a little bit more confident in these levels?
Yeah, and I mean, that's really the most, to me, I am very confused by the activity of the VIX. More than anything else going on in the marketplace. I understand we have rising inflation, had a real bad CPI number just last week, and I get that the market is where the market is, and we had to kind of expect that when we decided that we're just going to flood the system with all this cash to try to help us through the COVID times. To think that there wasn't going to be the end of that, obvious. Well, in hindsight, it's obvious. but you keep flooding the markets with this, we're going to have to start raising interest rates. We're going to have to start slowing the economy a little bit. Let's just hope that we don't overdo it. And one of the things that I'd love to see is just a big spike up in the VIX. Just we needed to get it out, flush the system. And then if that could happen somewhere, we talked about the 3,700 level. I would have loved to have seen that spike in the VIX drive the market down to that level and a little bit of a bounce. Now, these are just things that would make you feel a little bit better about jumping into the marketplace. You mentioned your little survey that you had about 3,700. Well, I would love to have seen that if we would have had a spike in the VIX to go along with it when we got to that level and went through. And so now we're hanging out there, but we still just, that nervousness, that angst in the marketplace, it just isn't where all the sellers are panicking and come in. We still haven't had that moment.
So just to paraphrase then, we got down to 36.5 in the big sell-off around that range. So 36.5 and a VIX of like 42, Brian Overby's buying. 36.5 and a VIX of 32, you're keeping your powder dry. That's what I'm hearing here?
Well, you're kind of hearing that, but my compliance department can't.
Just so, theoretically, you would buy at such levels. Yes.
In theory, that's where we're at. Right.
I like it. All right, Mr. Meatball, same question for you. First off, that was kind of our question a couple of weeks ago, but what are your thoughts on that continued debate about do we need that massive pop in VIX or even a pop above 40? Remember your buddy on the live vol views a couple of weeks ago, he was waiting for this VIX above 80 to really signal that the end was nigh and he could dive right in with both hands. What are your thoughts on that now? Do you think we still need that, or you think the sell-off, the levels we're seeing in the S&P is enough to spark a little confidence for you? And then outside of that, what else is catching your eye in this crazy Fed week, sir?
Well, Mark, this kind of reminds me of 2000, 2001. Like I was looking at how the market performed between like after September 11th through through June, July of 2002. And over that period of time, the S&P lost about 30% of its value and the VIX really didn't do anything, just kind of stayed high. And we could be in a line for that where, we have a 25, 30 VIX, which still signals, daily movement north of 2%. But where we have the VIX in the 30s, maybe not spiking, and this kind of slow, malaise move lower in volatility or in the S&P, and things get smoked. That's kind of what I'm looking at as I observe these markets.
So you don't think we're destined for a pop even above 40?
I think we could see 40. I think we could. We need a day. So far, have we had that day where things really just feel scary? No.
I think maybe Monday started to get there because Friday last week during the show, right? We were selling off. But if you call, even by the end of the day, vol was coming in again. Everyone's like, oh, this isn't it. And then if you had any upside in VIX, you had like an hour to get out of it before things cratered, like they always do.
Or like yesterday, we were down 150 handles and, VIX is all the way to 33. We're going to need a day where, the whole market is just, if we, I know we're not a commodity show, but, oil is getting destroyed today. If we had oil getting destroyed along with everything going on along with the NASDAQ getting crushed, then maybe, we're starting to see a lot of activity. And this is the part that where maybe we start to worry, right? We're starting to see a lot of bearish activity in credit sensitive assets. And we start to see things like commercial paper get locked up. That's when you can see the VIX pop up. Right now, credit markets are not that scary. They're set up to be scary, but they're not that scary right now. And really, VIX reacts a lot more and a lot more wild when credit markets lock up more than just equity markets selling off.
And 2008 definitely summed that up.
Yes, agreed.
That is, I think, the last time when we hit 80 on the VIX was when all of a sudden the money market funds were losing money if you had money in a money market fund. There were a couple of funds that I think went under during that period, just money market funds.
Yeah, that and then COVID are the last two times where credit was really locked up. Yeah. And that's what caused it. We're not in a spot where credit is locked up. and that's gonna keep things moving. We can sell off nice and slow. What you're looking at is multiple compression. So they are bringing in multiples of the S&P. I mean, if you want to do some math, today's rally is a bag holder's rally, right? They are handing you a bag. If you're buying Apple today, you are getting the bag hand. You know how I know Apple's going lower, Mark?
Your cabbie was talking about it?
A certain broker friend of ours that we both know, who shall remain nameless, was texting me saying he was going in on Apple and Google and Microsoft.
He's all in. This is it, huh? This is it, his moment.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, so it's time for me to buy more puts, is what you're telling me, my friend. So that is my sign that I think there's more to come, but this is a rally for bag holders. I think Apple has potential to go to 100.
That would be interesting. Apple, of course, already has given up pretty much the year. We are back at pretty much the start. Actually, might be down on the year now with today. Let's see, where is it right now? Apple, actually, it's up a little bit. So we're still back positive on the year. But interesting stuff. You also mentioned the energy. Of course, we did TWIFO yesterday. Check it out if you want to deep dive into energy and commodity vol. But you're right, they're coming for it today. Nat gas, we talked about yesterday. They've come for nat gas. It was north of $10 not too long ago. Now back in the 7.5 range or so, depending on where you're looking on that curve. WTI right now, that front future off nearly 8 handles, back below 110. You might say, my God, 110, that's still very expensive. And you're right. But it's also off about 8 handles just today. So maybe there isn't infinite upside for energy. And perhaps that's a good thing for markets at the end of the day. People have been worried and speculating now about, at these levels, diesel prices, it's shipping and trucking is unsustainable for a lot of the loads they need to do. So that's going to just exacerbate supply concerns here in the U.S. So a little bit of easing of those prices can only go a long way towards helping things out there in the broad market. Let's see if things are easing on the futures front. Remember, one of the things we talked about on the show last week, myself and the Rock Lobster, we were both kind of flummoxed. We were selling off pretty aggressively, and the VIX futures curve wasn't even backward yet. And that was a good sign that, VIX isn't really buying into what the market's selling right now. It needs more. And it didn't go backward until Monday session, like I mentioned, that second down leg on Monday after we seemed like things were mitigating towards the end of the session on Friday. That seemed to maybe spook some folks. Then we went backward for a brief period. I mean, backwardation hasn't been crushing things. Right now, coming at the start of the show today, we were slightly backward. That July future was a little bit north of 31, about 31.10. The AUG future, 30.85. You go out to November, it's about 30.5. So we were slightly backward then. We'll see if that even survives the rest of the session. That means coming into showtime, we had the July future up 1.9, nearly 2 points. Remember, June off the board now, so July is the front contract. And then August up about 1.5 points. I'm sure if we re-rack those numbers right now, they'd be up even less. Mr. Meatball, anything catching your eye out there in the land of VIX futures this week, sir?
Exactly what you said. The curve has been pretty reliably flat, and that has been about it. It's not been on any level a very exciting time. June rolled off this week, which I think is a big deal, and settled 31. Nice little pop there. July is a long cycle. Something to think about. July doesn't expire till the 20th. So after regular July expiration. So if you're wondering why is kind of things a little more tepid, there's that. Volumes have been pretty good. The curve, pretty flat, just people trading all around it. And that's been what we're looking at.
Yeah, it's kind of flat has been the name of the game for a while. And that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in again right now. So if you're looking, I've often joked many times on this show, the answer to all of your vol questions, it lies somewhere in that VIX futures curve. Just a question of how we find it. But right now it's not telling us a heck of a lot. So it is very much kind of up in the air what we see going forward. And do you expect a lot more out of this futures curve? You think this is we've been hanging out in this flat zone for a while. If things get very aggressively backward, that might be a good sign that maybe we're heading for a little bit of this capitulation everyone's looking for out there. That'll usually go along with a much higher level of VIX. So we'll see if we can get some juicy backwardation, or if this kind of little bit of a upward slant we got here is probably the best we're going to get for some time. Speaking of the best we're going to get right now, spikes options. A lot of that paper we talked about last week, a lot of the OI expired, rolled off the board. The big dog out there right now, still my favorite position, the July pars. We talk about all this crazy upside in VIX options. Spikes options not immune to that. The July pars dominating the tape out there right now. In terms of VIX options, it's kind of been a bit of a weird week. In fact, yesterday, as we were kind of talking about on the option block, I thought for a second there that my quotes were down or broken, because VIX, if you had looked at it, you would have thought it was a quiet Tuesday in late August, that there was literally nothing going on. Towards the middle of the option block, we were only at about not even 250,000 contracts in VIX, which, given the fact that every other index was at or about to exceed their ADV, VIX was just doing a whole heck of a lot of nothing. So it ended up being a little bit better day, but still pretty anemic given all the market shocks we saw going on around it. Let's see what's going on today. And today, a little bit of a more active day out there. 451,000 contracts on the tape right now. So already a couple 100,000 more contracts than we were at the same time roughly yesterday. The ADV pretty much hanging out, which, again, given how anemic VIX was throughout most of the week, that makes sense. It's up about 1,000 contracts to 547. So pretty much right around where it was this time last week. What has changed is the top 10. That has swung a little bit. It was 50-50 calls to puts for a while, which is kind of emblematic of what we're seeing in the VIX futures curve and everything else. Everything's kind of just shrugging its shoulders. Like, we don't know which way to go. And the top 10 was kind of reflecting that as well. 50-50 for a while out there. Now we're back to 70-30 calls over puts. So calls outnumbering puts in the top 10, at least for this week. Read into that what you will. Number 10, it cost you 112,000 contracts to break into the top 10 size positions in VIX this week. That gets you to the July 75. So that won't come as a mystery to any of our longer time listeners, because there's folks out there who just love the 75 strike and they're just lighting it up in pretty much all the expiration cycles. July coming in at the bottom today with a $112. Number 9, 122,000 of the July 21 puts, the first of only 3 puts on the list. You know, this 70-30 calls of puts, this is reminiscent of the way VIX normally is, and dare I say it should be. It's a call-dominated product for a reason. And yet, in the highlight and the heyday of this pandemic, things have gotten all topsy-turvy. There's been weeks where there's been 10 puts and not a call to be found, which is highly aberrant for VIX, to put it mildly. So seeing it back to being call-dominated, at least for 1 week, warms the old fuzzies out there. Let's go out to number 8, $126. Back to the crazy strikes, the NOV 70s. If the 75 strike was a little bit too rich, too optimistic for your outlook, then I present to you humbly the NOV 70s. $126 of those for number 8. Number 7, we got our second of 3 puts, $132 of the July 22 puts. Number 6, back to the upside, July 50s, 138,000 of those. Number 5, we have 144,000 of the SEP 75s. So 75 love just continuing across the expiration cycles. Number 4, our third and final puts in our top 10 countdown here. $149 of the July 20 puts. So that's the July 22, 21, and 20 puts. Nice little put strip. And that's all we got on the put side this week. Number 3, 154,000 of the AUG 75s. Number 2, the comparatively, dare I say it, reasonable July 30s, 187,000 of those bad boys. And number 1 with a bullet, you know what it is. It's been number 1 for ages now. 352,000 of the AUG 75s, still our 1x5 friend, just loaded for bear there to the upside. Does it mean he's looking for that? No. Does it mean he's concerned about that? Probably. He's hedging to that upside. He could have a credit portfolio or something else out there that would really look pretty nasty with VIX at those higher levels. But either way, intriguing stuff afoot. Mr. Brian, before I get to this week's activity, I'm just curious for you. What are your thoughts on VIX? Dare I say it, maybe returning to some semblance of normalcy, at least from an activity and from a volume perspective, where we're actually talking about calls for a change. And then B, speaking of calls, we've been talking for a while here on the show about the just amazing prevalence of these extreme upside strikes. I mean, the 75s are just the beginning. We've got pars going up in June. We got 110s and 115s going up in September. It seems like every outlandish strike you could think of has been lighting up the tape for the last month or so. So B, what are your thoughts? Have you noticed that paper over there at Ally? And what are your thoughts on this renewed prevalence of, shall we say, extreme upside in VIX?
It goes along with a lot that I said at the top of the show, that it's befuddling, and I don't want to overuse that term, to see the VIX where it is at, and we need that capitulation moment to happen. And the highs, reason why I see a lot of people buying those calls on the 75 is that 80 level seems to be a mark of a high. So they're anticipating that the VIX could get to 80. They're buying the 75s, hoping that they are correct on their forecast on it. And obviously, that's a chip in a chair. It's almost impossible to try to figure out exactly where futures are going to be at one specific time. So they're cheap, but I can see the rationale that's behind the 75 strike. And when do I think we could get to that is, that if we do go into the recession, you can't call it a recession right now. Everybody's talking about the recession, but we don't have negative GDP to go along with the unemployment. The unemployment numbers are still good at this point in time. And I think if we could get, and I don't want this, I'm not looking for it, but I think that's what these people that are buying these 75 calls are looking for, is that declaration of the fact that we could or are in a recession. And that would be a number I think you can target because of that. So very straightforward. I see it. I don't know about the paper at Ally. I haven't followed the specific strikes on the VIX. We are seeing more activity in it, but I don't get a report on exactly what strikes are being bought, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Let's see what makes sense out here in this week's paper. Like I said, today, a little bit more action on the tape than yesterday. 451,000 contracts coming into the start of this segment here. The big dog today, almost 100,000, 97,000 of the July 50s, followed by about 96,000 of the July 60s. Do I smell a vertical out there? 50-60 vertical. What do you think about that one, listeners? I'll have to pull that up later and see exactly where that one went up. But that's certainly more interesting than the bars. They got 22,000 of the July 40s. Again, back to that VIX of 40 level. Number 3, 21,000 of the July 35s. And I was about to say, I thought we had it. I thought we had a top 5 of all calls, but there is one put sneaking in there. The July 26 puts with about 20,000 of those. Yesterday, I said, just a weirdly quiet day. 412,000 contracts on the tape. The big dog, such as it was yesterday, 31,000 of the July 25 puts, followed by number 2, 17,000 of the OX 60s. Number 3, 17,000 of the SEP 60s. Looks like maybe a bit of a roll. Number 4, 12,000. Here we go. Back to the fun strikes. The OC pars, 12,500 of those bad boys going up yesterday. So on a day when a bunch of nothing really happened, someone put up 12,500 of the October 100 calls. There we go. And then number 5 yesterday, about 12,000 of the July 32 halves. Wednesday, a little bit more paper. You could kind of see why the ADV and VIX is struggling right now, listeners. Only 495,000 contracts on the tape. And VIX, again, that's a Fed day, listeners, and a whole heck of a lot of nothing, really. 177, that would be nice. 17,000 was the big dog. That gets us to the July 30. So on the Fed day, the biggest, most active contract, not even 18,000 contracts. That's not a lot. Right behind it, we have 17,000 of the SEP 60s. So back to that 60 strike again, followed by 17,000 as well of the OX 60s. So that same spread going up on Wednesday as well. Is that a roll, or are they kind of just setting up a calendar there to play with the term structure? Interesting stuff. Wednesday, we also had 17,000 as well of the SEP 35s and about 15,000 of the July 35s. Tuesday, again, 440,000. Took a lot to really budge the needle this week. Big dog on Tuesday, 36,000 of the June 32 halves. Again, going into expiration there, listeners. Followed by 27,000 of the June 30s, 26,000 of the June 35s, and 24,000 of the June 30 puts. Monday was the big dog this week. Monday was where, like I mentioned, we saw that second leg of the sell-off. Seemed like people started to get a little spooked. We saw the VIX curve go backward. If there was a day this week that I could point to, or in the last couple of weeks where I would say, hey, maybe this is the day where people are maybe getting a little bit spooked, it would be Monday. And that is reflected in the VIX numbers. Remember I said on Monday's option block, I said, there's a chance we might get an M handle out here today. Didn't quite make it, but we got within spitting distance, 946,000. That's the closest we've been to a million out there in quite some time. The big dog on Monday, 80,000 of the June 35 calls, followed by about 69,000 actually of the June 30s, 68,000 of the June 32 halves, 34,000, and fall off a cliff there to number 4 of the June 40s, and rounding out the top 5, even on Monday, you can't get all 5 calls. Number 5 on Monday, 33,000 of the June 30 puts. Mr. Meatball, kind of a weird week from a volume perspective. As I mentioned, outside of Monday, not a heck of a lot really going up this week. And what did go up, let's say there was some weirdness. We have, of course, that SEP-OX 60 spread, which is kind of interesting. I have to go dig in to see if they were opening on both legs or what they were doing there. But either a weird time to roll your SEP to OC or maybe an interesting time to take advantage of that term structure. And then we also have these other trades we were talking about out here this week as well. So a lot of fun stuff, including the 50-60 today, going up 100,000 times. Anything catching your eye this week? And what do you think of either of those spreads, sir?
Yeah, well, I did see that 50-60 go up. It was a call spread. I went back and looked. It's opening. So we got an opening call spread buyer on the 50-60 strike today. And then, yeah, some of the other stuff, just kind of an anemic day. It's been a weird period for VIX. So yesterday, while the VIX is super anemic, S&P's traded 3.1 million contracts, Mark. Think about that. Now, obviously, we got the roll going on, so that's going to add to that. But still, the S&P 500 was absolutely booming. And VIX is just yawning the day away. It was a weird one, and we could be in for, like, if things are going to stay anemic like this, we could see a lot of sub 400,000 days coming up in VIX.
Yeah, you're right. I'm looking at this vertical right now. They just put it up straight up, listeners, about 95,000 times. July 50-60. They bought the 50s for $1.13, sold the 60s for 71 cents. You know, it's almost refreshing, Mark, that we didn't just see a ton of like the pars going up today. I mean, 50-60 is still out there, but you know, it's a somewhat normal VIX trade.
It's reasonable.
Yes,
It
exactly.
is reasonable.
Exactly. Right. It's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
So to see that, maybe we are returning to the realm of somewhat normalcy out here in VIX. It's been a while since we've seen that type of trade. It's been all this other weirdo nonsense for the better part of the last few months. And it's fun to talk about on a show like this, but at the end of the day, this is the kind of stuff that really kind of matters. This is the stuff that has a much higher probability of actually being impactful out here. So intriguing stuff afoot. What do you think, listeners, of that 50-60 vertical out there in July? You a fan? What do you think has to happen to even make that spread start popping a bit? Obviously, you don't have to get to 50. We talked about that before, even with these garbage calls. You don't have to get to 100 to make those things resonate. You just need to have a little bit of pop, a little bit of upside, and you could see some VIX upside pop. So if we do start seeing another leg of this sell-off, maybe another day like Monday where VIX curve gets backward, we start popping again, you might see a little bit of juice out of this 56. I will say this, I don't hate it anywhere near as much as a bunch of the other stuff we've talked about out here. Let's see if you folks love or hate SVIX. It's kind of a weird, mixed signals out here. Because from an options perspective, it seems like you folks really don't give a you-know-what about all things SVIX. Because it's not exactly lighting things up. Coming into showtime, it was at a 970. SVIX, of course, listeners, the inverse VIX product. It was down a little over 1 point out there. It's at about a 970. Actually, it's right about the same level, so about 975 right now. So it hasn't really moved much out there today. Actually seeing, I guess, in relative terms, for this name at least, decent paper, because the ADV is only 677 contracts, but we're seeing about 650 already today. So that's at least a sign that it's putting up some numbers. Again, we're not even getting to 1,000 contracts out here, so I'm going to reserve my judgment until we get a little bit farther along. But interesting stuff. Looking at some top positions, I mean, such as they are, the big dog out there is about 906 of the June 9 puts. Remember, these expire on your regular expiration cycle, not with VIX. So that's why there's still June to be had here in SVIX. So these will be going out today. It looks like, in fact, most of the top 5 is going the way of the dodo today. We have 500 of the June 13 calls, all that going away. So we'll have a whole new top positions, such as it is out here, to talk about tomorrow. In terms of, or I should say next week, in terms of what's lighting it up out there today, looks like it's the July 12s doing 135 contracts, and the Jan 2023 7 puts going up 100 times today as well. 7 puts in SVIX, listeners, for Jan. Looks like they sold those for $1.25. I was going to say, you're buying the 7 puts. That's interesting, but selling the 7 puts, I mean, I don't like, you know me, I don't like my short premium trades to go out that far. It makes dare I say it, a little bit more sense, because you're kind of capped on that trade. I mean, unless you think SVIX can go to 0, which we saw XIV. Think crazier things have happened, but there we go. Mr. Meatball, what are your thoughts on SVIX this week? And do you like selling a 100 lot of the Jan 7 puts for $1.25?
Well, if your goal is to own SVIX, it's not a terrible idea. I will say that. Until the curve flat goes into backwardation or into some sort of normalization, going to be a tough sled, but it's interesting.
Yeah, not my favorite trade out here. Brian, I'm curious for you over there at Ally. I know you were not when these products were brought back, especially the inverse product. I think it's fair to say you weren't the biggest fan for understandable reasons. We all saw what happened with XIV. No one wants a repeat of that. Now that we've got a little bit of time under our belts here, I'm curious from your lens over there at Ally, have you started to see any of your customers start to trade these, either SVIX or the more popular 2X levered UVIX? Have these come on the radar at all? Or are they still kind of fringe products?
They're definitely fringe products as far as our clients are concerned. But yeah, interesting. You look at that 7 strike, and even if you get down to the 5 strike, you basically have a spread, and you consider it a 5/0 put spread on it. So it's interesting because you're getting that much premium, but I guess you get you receive what you're looking for by going all the way to that expiration date. And interesting trade though, $1.25. That's a lot of for that 7. Was it 7.5 or the 7?
The 7 puts.
7 puts. Yeah. I'm going to say interesting. I think I'll leave it there. And I think you highlighted the fact that you basically get that free put at 0, that free long put. So that's why I use the term interesting.
I like that. A free long put at 0. Yes.
Yeah.
That's one way to put it. I like that. I'm gonna have to borrow that if you don't mind. That's fantastic. But free long put. The market will stop you out at 0. That's how nice they are. But I'm hearing, Brian, if I read between the lines here, is I think you got your next trade of the week there for OPR, huh? Selling some July puts in SVIX. What do you think?
Oh man, no, I don't. I want to stay away from that. The VIX is a little bit for OPR. VIX is a little bit crazy, and we had a real good session on it not that long ago. Actually, when the VVIX hit that bottom, we started talking about buying premium at that point in time. But this is the SVIX is a different beast.
Free put at 0. I got a feeling I'm using that again, Brian. I'm gonna put that in my quiver for down the road. Hey, what's the worst that could happen? You get a free put at 0. Let's go out to UVIX and see what we're up to out there. UVIX, of course, the 2X levered product, at least through the options lens, which is how we tend to look on this show, the much more popular of the two products, which was kind of what we predicted at the gate. Even though SVIX was getting all the headlines, UVIX seemed like it had perhaps the more tangible use case for a lot of you out there. That seems to be the case. Coming into showtime, UVIX was at about a 19 3/4. So that puts it up about 2.5 points since our last show. It's pretty much still right around there, about a nickel away. In terms of action, actually seeing some paper out there, because the ADV is, compared to SVIX, what was SVIX? It was not even 700 contracts a day. UVIX is doing 3,742 a day. So it's still pretty anemic, but orders of magnitude better than what we're seeing out there in SVIX. That's up 1,300 contracts in this time last week. So while VIX hasn't been doing a heck of a lot of nothing, UVIX has been putting up some paper. Granted, it's starting from a much lower baseline, but still intriguing out there. And today, no slouch either, about 2,300 contracts on the tape. Let's look really quickly before we get out to today's action. What are the top positions? Because there actually is some size to be found out here in UVIX. Let's do a quick top 5. Number 5 out here. That's what we were just talking about. Not so much the 7s, but the Jan 15 puts. 1,031 of those. That's interesting. What are they up to on those? Are they selling those? Are they buying the Jan 30? What are you doing with the 15 puts in SVIX? That's an interesting question. Number 4, 12,000. Remember, at the end of the day, you get that free 0 put, so you're good to go. Number 1,200 of the June 19 calls. Number 3, 2001. Interesting movie. Intriguing position here. The Dees 18 puts. We got stuff all over the place here in UVIX. Number 2, 2,254 of the July 27s. And the big dog, such as it is out here in UVIX this week, 3,308 of the July 19 calls. Interesting. That's pretty much an in-the-money call right now. So, and in terms of what's lighting it up out there today, it's looks like about 435 to be precise, of the June 20 puts, followed by about 400 of the June 22 calls. Again, all this going away the dodo today. 313 of the June 20s. And then we get out to July, 121 of the July 12 puts, and a whopping 88 of the June 21 calls. Mr. Meatball, you kind of predicted early on that UVIX would resonate more with people. That clearly is the case, at least from an options perspective. What are your thoughts on what we've been seeing out there this past week, sir?
Yeah, I'd still love to see the option markets tighten up some, but we are starting to see some volume and at least a little bit of volume in near dated contracts. The stock itself is the ETF itself is a huge success, right? It's you get an ETF to averaging 1.7, 1.8 million shares a day. That's pretty darn good. I continue to think that we're going to see some this pull dollars out of UVXY over time, but I'd like to see this option market tighten up.
I think we all like tighter options markets. That's a good thing. Where we have not seen a lot of tighter options markets of late, it's been going the other way, unfortunately, is VXX down to about, I should say up to about a 24.60 when we kicked off the show. Up not even a full point, about 0.8 of a point. Again, this product, very much a pale shadow of what it used to be. Putting up, let's see, today, we had about 50,000 contracts on the tape. The ADV is now 91,000, down another 5,000 from what it was this time last week. Let's just do a top 3 out here because we got to get rolling. And VXX, not what it once was. Number 3 position out there in VXX, 43,000 of the July 20 puts. Number 2, 47,000 of the June 16 puts. And number 1 out there, 109,000 of the AUG 16 puts. Yes, it is still all top 10, all puts all the time. Nobody wants to touch a call out here in VXX for understandable reasons. If you want to play VIX upside, there are better products to do it in. Right now, today, we have the big, most active contracts, the June 25 puts, 4,100 of those, followed by 3,500 of the June 25s, 2,300 of the June 24 half puts, 2,000 of the June 24 half calls, and 1,800 of the June 26 puts. UVXY doing a little bit more paper out there, even though, as Mr. Meatball postulated, let's see if UVIX starts coming for that in the near future. UVXY was at a 16 when we kicked off the show. It's up a point. It got up much higher earlier in the week, so UVXY has done a lot of living since our last show. The ADV also looking more robust out there as well. It's 293,000 contracts, up 20,000. Seems like we're going to hit that today. The numbers today already at 258,000 out there. Let's get on out to do a quick, let's do a quick top 5 out here in all things UVXY. Number 5, we got the June 14 puts. It's pretty much all June. 13,000 of those, 14,000 of the June 20 calls. Number 3, 14,000 as well, the June 10 puts. Number 2, 19,000, back to those interesting strikes, the June 75s. I think they're pretty sure they're usually overwriting these things, so those are probably going to look pretty good. And then number 1, 21,000 of the June 12 puts. Imagine if we got to the 75 strike in UVXY by the end of the day today. What would have to happen, listeners, to make that? Nothing good, that's for sure. In terms of today's activity, we got the big dog today. We've got 22,000 of the June 16 calls, followed by 19,000 of the June 17 calls, 15,500 of the June 16 puts. Number 4, 15,000 of the June 16 half puts. And rounding out the top 5 today, 15,000 as well of the June 17 puts. Mr. Meatball, I think catching your eye out there in the continually neutered VXX, or the perhaps destined to face off with UVIX, UVXY, sir?
Yeah, nothing special. They kind of took off. UVXY is pretty active today. All stuff that's expiring today. The 16 calls have traded 22,000 times. The 16.5s and 17 super active, and then you've got some downside trading as well. 15,000 each of the 17, 16.5, and 16 puts. So UVXY busy on expiration, but that's about it. VXX, yeah. I mean, come on, Barclays. Get it together.
And we have to get it together into our next segment. It is time for a quick stop into the volatility voicemail.
It's time to share your thoughts and opinions with your fellow volatility traders. It's time to check the volatility voicemail. Make your voice heard by dialing 779-669-4VOL. Posting a comment on the optionsinsider.com, sending an email to questions@theoptionsinsider.com, or posting your questions to twitter.com/options or facebook.com/theoptionsinsider.
All right, everybody, we had questions of the week flying fast and furious this week. A lot going on this week. You guys knocked it out of the park with our flash poll around the Fed. We asked you, how many basis points is the Fed going to raise? 25, 50, 75, or a full point? It's only had like an hour or two right before the announcement. So you guys crushed it. 50% exactly saying 75 basis points. 35% saying 50 basis points. About 13% saying a full point. So getting up there, and about a little under 3% getting 25 basis points. No love for the quarter points out there. We also asked you last week about SIBO launching a new open outcry floor. Is that still relevant? 45.3% of you said yes, that is still important. 30% of you said nope, electronic or bust. And 24.5% of you said, what the heck's open outcry? We need to work with you folks. So hopefully you're tuning in to shows like Options Playbook Radio and Options Bootcamp that will help get you up to speed. Our current question of the week right now, which is contentious as you might imagine, Bitcoin and crypto. We said the crypto bloodbath this week makes it a good time to revisit this question. And when we posted this poll on Monday, we were at exactly 25,000 in Bitcoin, obviously a wee bit lower now. Quite simply, which level will Bitcoin hit first, 10,000 or 50,000? Mr. Brian, we will start with you, sir. If you have a vote, have at it. And then more importantly, what do you think our audience is voting for, sir?
Oh, all right. Well, if I had to vote, I would vote 10 versus 50 if I had to. I don't like those numbers, but I guess I would go 10. I would think the audience would be towards the 50 range. Just because the confidence isn't there, but gosh, how much lower can it go? I guess that's what my thinking would be from retail clients.
Interesting. Mr. Meatball, same question for you, sir. If you have a pick, have at it. And more importantly, what do you think our audience is voting for?
I'm going to go with Brian. He's never wrong, so why would I argue with him?
There we go. Well, unfortunately, in this case, you are both wrong because our audience, overwhelmingly, 73.4% choosing 10,000. That surprises me a little bit, too. I thought maybe a few more hodlers lurking out there. Only 26.6% saying they're going to get to 50K. So if you disagree with that, you have 21 minutes left, listeners. So a lot of people have already poured in there. I'm listening on the podcast. Unfortunately, you're out of luck. That's why you need to be following us at Options throughout the week. We put out a lot of great content and polls you can play along in, like that one. So it seems like the crypto bears will have it. Now it's time to see if the vol bears or bulls will have it. It is time for the crystal ball.
It's time to peer into the future and reveal what the volatility gods hold in store. It's time to look into the crystal ball.
Man, we got a lot of dire chat going on in our chat right now. Folks saying, we were talking about earlier about our notion of the VIX capitulation theory. Some folks saying they're not into that. They don't care what level the VIX is at as long as the S&P gets down to around 3,300 or so. That's the level they want to see from a buy-in perspective. They say unless it hits those 75s, those come into play in October, then maybe it becomes more of a concern. We also have Unlimited in our chat saying, I don't think we will see under 19 in VIX for a while. I think we will see 50 before we see 19. Wow, that's dire. I think once China invades Taiwan, oh my goodness, all those upside calls come into play. And from what I'm seeing, it's really heating up there in East Asia. Well, now I'm terrified. So thanks for that, listeners out there. Usually our chat not quite that dire, listeners, but hey, these are the times in which we live, listeners. Let's get on out now. Crystal Ball, of course, the portion of the show, listeners, where we attempt to wrestle with the vol gods and see what they hold in store for us. Coming into the end of the show, remember I said there's probably going to be a little bit of evolution in the vol products, so I take that back. They haven't really moved much at all. Spikes was at 31.5 when we kicked off the show. It's at a 31.37 right now. VIX Cash was at a 31.25 when we kicked off the show. It's at about 31.10 now. So moral of the story is myself and the Rock Lobster, we did not see this one coming. He was at a 24.01 last week. I was liking a little bit less vol, but nowhere near as aggressive as him. So he was off quite a bit, about 7 handles. I was off quite a bit as well, but not quite as much. I was at 26 double for this point last week. So no love there. You know, I mocked Unlimited, but he was one of the closer ones in our listener polls here. I'll have to have our producers go through, see if anyone else. By the way, listeners, if you want to play along in our crystal ball game, at Options is the place to do it. You can email us questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Of course, if you're listening live, you can put your predictions there into the chat. Looks like we got some 33 guesses, all sorts of stuff already coming into the live chat out there. So if you want to play along, if you win, if you get within our 10th of a point frame of reference, then you get a bullseye. You get a winner chicken dinner. Doesn't cost you anything. You just get to play along and have fun, win some fabulous prizes, because none of us on the panel are winning any prizes today. That means, Mr. Brian, we all lose, so you win because you get the dubious honor of going first, sir. What are you feeling for volatility this time next week?
I am. I guess I just stick with the theme of that I've had on the show, that I think the VIX should be higher. And let's go 33. Why not? I don't know exactly why it's going to be there, but I think it's going to be higher than where it is right now. And I think it should be higher.
Uh-oh, you scum and options queen in our chat. She went 33 about 5 minutes ago, sir. She's going to be sending you some hate mail here.
33.01.
Oh, there we go. Price is right. 33.01 for Brian.
There you go.
All right, Mr. Meatball, same question for you. You weren't around last week, so you didn't get a chance to lose horrifically like myself and the Rock Lobster. What are you feeling for this time next week, sir?
I'm going to say 27-27.
You just love those nice palindromic type numbers, don't you? They roll off the tongue.
You're right. I should say 27-72.
There we go.
Palindromic.
There we go. Then it is complete. So let's go 20. Let's flip that around. Let's go 27-72. Numeric alliteration, call it what you will out there. He likes those numbers that roll off the tongue. So we got a 33 and a 27. You know, I'm spooked now by all this talk of tanks rolling in Taiwan. Let's get that out of the head out here instead. Let's just look at what we were looking at coming into the start of the show, where we are. Things are still kind of frothy. It does seem like it takes a Herculean effort to really make VIX not just pop up there, but stay up at these levels for quite some time. Will we see another one of these Herculean efforts? It is quite possible. We could be up here again this time next week. But I think it's going to be around where we are right now. So I'm going to say 31. I'm going to say 31.25. So there's our market there, listeners. Mark on the downside, 27.72. Myself in the middle, 31.25, and the Meatball on the upside. I should say Brian on the upside at 33.01. All right, everybody. Packed a lot of living into an hour. Remember, if there's a topic you'd like us to discuss on the show or a question you have for us, you know where to reach out to us at Options. If you want to get it bumped to the top of the list, you join our live chat. We look at all that stuff and filter what's interesting or perhaps terrifying out onto the show. But before we go, Mr. Brian, if folks want to get more Brian Overby in their lives, where should they go? What should they do?
Well, obviously, we have Options Playbook Radio, and you can find it anywhere that you can listen to your favorite podcast. And then just follow me on Twitter. I tweet about all of the events that I'm doing week in and week out, and my handle is at Brian Overby.
And look forward to that SVIX put trade coming up next week, Brian. I'm looking forward to that one. I want to hear that episode myself. And Mr. Meatball, same question for you, sir. If folks have questions about all this vol, and how could they not? Where should they go? What should they do?
Yeah, go to optionpit.com and check us out. We're writing good content on VIX, volatility, macro, big money, order flow, you name it. Go to optionpit.com, read every blog we write.
And I look forward to your upcoming blog on the departure of Vince McMahon, sir, and your thoughts on the Vince McMahon era.
I cannot believe that still.
I'm glad we got a chance to break that news to you live here on the show. Listeners, for all of you on-demand folks, this is going to conclude your broadcast week. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending it with us this week. For all you pro folks, we'll be back in a little bit to send you off in style with a nice dose of options oddities. Were there some weird trades to highlight this week? Yeah, as always, a whole bunch of them. We're going to squeeze as many as we can into an hour out there, do some live trading, other fun stuff as well. Whatever floats our boat out there, options oddities. So for all you on-demand folks, stay safe out there, and we'll see you back next week, another episode of Volatility Views.
Volatility Views is brought to you by MIAX, one of the fastest, most efficient trading platforms in the world. MIAX is proud to bring you SPIX Volatility products. SPIX options and futures are traded on the SPIX Volatility Index, SPIK, offering pinpoint accuracy, radically faster dissemination, and a highly transparent settlement auction, all for ultra-low exchange fees. It's volatility reimagined. Learn more about SPIX at miaxoptions.com/spikes. Options and futures involve risk and are not suitable for all investors. The statements made are provided for informational purposes only and should not be relied on for financial or legal advice. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.